Case 1. Ruby Franke, the momfluencer who tortured her own children. If you had been watching Ruby Franke's YouTube channel in the early days, you would have seen exactly what she wanted you to see. A beautiful home in Utah, 6 healthy children, a devoted mother documenting family life with warmth, structure, and what she called godly discipline. The channel was called 8 Passengers, named for Franke, her husband Kevin, and their 6 kids. By the time its popularity peaked around 2020, the channel had accumulated 2.5 million subscribers and over 1 billion views. 1 billion. Ruby Franke was not just a Utah mom. She was a household name in the world of family content creation. But even then, the cracks were showing, if you knew where to look. Viewers who watched closely noticed things that made their stomachs turn. In one video, Franke refused to bring her then 6-year-old child lunch at school after the child forgot to pack it, citing the need for children to face natural consequences. In another, she revealed she had canceled Christmas for 2 of her children as punishment. She threatened to throw away her kids' prized possessions on camera. There were videos of a 15-year-old boy who had been banned from his bedroom and forced to sleep on a beanbag chair for 7 straight months. Concerned viewers contacted Child Protective Services repeatedly. Nothing happened. The cameras kept rolling. The subscriber count kept climbing. Then, in 2022, everything changed. The 8 Passengers channel was suspended. Franke separated from her husband Kevin and began working as a mental health coach at a company called Connections, a life coaching and parenting program run by a licensed therapist named Jody Hildebrandt. The 2 women launched a new channel together called Connections, opened a joint Instagram account called Moms of Truth, and began offering paid parenting classes. What they were teaching to parents across the country, and what they were doing to Franke's own children inside Hildebrandt's home in Ivins, Utah, was something prosecutors would later describe as existing inside a concentration camp-like setting. On August 30th, 2023, a desperate 12-year-old boy climbed out of a window at Jody Hildebrandt's home. He ran to a neighbor. He asked for food and water. When that neighbor looked at the boy standing before them, they saw a child who was severely emaciated and malnourished, with open wounds on his body and duct tape still bound around his wrists and ankles. Police were called immediately. Officers arrived at Hildebrandt's home and found Franke's 10-year-old daughter inside in a similar condition, malnourished, wounded, bearing the unmistakable signs of sustained, systematic abuse. Both Franke and Hildebrandt were arrested that same day. Both were charged with 6 counts of felony aggravated child abuse. What prosecutors uncovered during the investigation was almost impossible to comprehend. According to Franke's own guilty plea, her 12-year-old son had been kept bound for extended periods. She had forced his head underwater. She had cut off his oxygen by smothering him with her hands. She had kicked him while wearing boots. Her 10-year-old daughter had been denied food and water, made to run barefoot on dirt roads repeatedly, and told over and over that she was evil and possessed. Hildebrandt had coerced the girl to jump into a cactus multiple times. The children were told they were filled with dark spirits that needed to be expelled through physical suffering and deprivation. The motive was rooted in a twisted, extremist religious ideology. Both Franke and Hildebrandt had convinced themselves, and attempted to convince their clients in the parenting classes they were selling, that harsh physical punishment was necessary to help children properly repent for sins and cast out evil. The Washington County Attorney described it plainly. This was a case of religious extremism. On December 18, 2023, Ruby Franke stood in court and pleaded guilty. She pleaded guilty to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse, each one a second-degree felony. 9 days later, Jody Hildebrandt did the same. On February 20, 2024, both women were sentenced by Judge John Walton in Utah's 5th Judicial District Court to 4 consecutive prison terms of 1 to 15 years each. Under Utah law, the maximum aggregate sentence for consecutive terms is 30 years, and that is exactly what the judge handed down. 4 to 30 years in Utah State Prison. The Utah Board of Pardons and Parole will determine the precise length of time they each serve, but neither woman's first parole hearing is scheduled until December 2026 at the earliest. In court, Ruby Franke cried. She told the judge, "I believe dark was light and right was wrong." County Prosecutor Eric Clark stood before the court and said that in the institutional memory of his entire office, not just in his career. The abuse inflicted on these children was the worst they had ever seen. Jodi Hildebrandt, by contrast, showed little to no remorse, according to prosecutors. She claimed to be a martyr. She called herself a victim. Judge Walton looked directly at her and said, "You didn't do that in this case. In this case, you terrorized children." Ruby Franke had 4 to 30 years to think about what she chose to do to the children she put on camera for the world to admire. If this story shook you to your core the way it shook us, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Cold Case Time so you never miss another story like this. We go deep so that these victims are never forgotten. Case 2. Megan Huntsman, 18 years of deadly secrets in a Pleasant Grove garage. There is a type of crime so incomprehensible that when detectives first hear about it, their minds simply refuse to accept it. The case of Megan Huntsman is one of those crimes. On April 12, 2014, a man named Darren West called 911 from a home in Pleasant Grove, Utah, a quiet, mostly Mormon community about 35 miles south of Salt Lake City. West had recently been released from federal prison after serving an 8-year sentence on methamphetamine charges. He was at the home he had once shared with his estranged wife, Megan, trying to clean out the garage so he could move into the space. That was when his daughter opened a box and found what appeared to be a dead infant inside a plastic bag. West called police. When officers arrived, they began a search of the garage. They found a second baby, then a third, then a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, and a seventh. 7 infants, each one wrapped in a towel or a shirt, placed inside a plastic bag and stored in a separate cardboard box. The boxes had been sitting in that garage, in some cases, for nearly 2 decades. Megan Huntsman, then 39 years old, was brought in for questioning. At first, she told investigators the first baby had been stillborn, that she had panicked, didn't know what to do, and hidden the body. Then, about an hour into the interview, detectives at the scene reported finding a second baby, then a third. The story Huntsman eventually told was one that would haunt investigators for years. Over a 10-year period, from January 1, 1996, to December 31, 2006, Megan Huntsman had secretly given birth to 7 babies inside her Pleasant Grove home, all without medical assistance, all without telling anyone. For 6 of those 7 births, the moment the baby entered the world, Huntsman pressed her thumbs against the infant's neck and squeezed until the child was dead. In at least one case, she used a black elastic hair tie around the baby's throat to make sure the job was done. She then wrapped the tiny body, placed it in a plastic bag, and packed it into a box. The 7th child, she maintained, had been stillborn. Darren West, who DNA testing confirmed was the biological father of all 7 children, insisted he had no idea his wife had been pregnant any of those times. Police chose to believe him. West was never charged. Huntsman's 3 surviving daughters, aged 14, 18, and 20 at the time of their mother's arrest, had lived in that same house. The youngest daughter had been born during the very years her siblings were being murdered. Not one of them had known. The prosecution painted a clear picture of motive. Huntsman was a heavy methamphetamine and alcohol user throughout those years. She was in an abusive marriage. She was depressed and isolated. According to Detective Dan Beckstrom, who led the investigation, Huntsman had told police simply that she didn't want the babies. She kept the 3 living children because those pregnancies had been known to others. The others, the ones born in secret, she killed. In her statement to the court at sentencing, Huntsman said something that stopped the room cold. In some small way, I wanted to help them avoid the terrible life I would have given them. There was no audible response to that. Huntsman pleaded guilty in February 2015 to 6 counts of murder, each one a first-degree felony. On April 20, 2015, 4th District Judge Daryl McDade sentenced her to 6 terms of 5 years to life in prison, 3 to be served consecutively, 3 concurrently. Utah County Attorney Jeff Booman walked out of the sentencing and told reporters plainly, "I don't think she'll ever be released. My guess is she'll serve the rest of her life." The bodies of those 6 babies, who never received names, who never drew more than their first breath, were finally given dignity in death. Their mother will die in prison for what she did to them. If you're watching Cold Case Time for the first time and a story like Megan Huntsman's is what brought you here, welcome. Please hit like and subscribe. These stories need to be told, and your support helps us keep telling them. Case 3. Kouri Richins, the grieving mother who wrote a children's book. In the world of grief, few images are more sympathetic than a widow writing a children's book to help her 3 young sons understand the death of their father. That is exactly the image Kouri Richins wanted the world to see. But according to prosecutors in Summit County, Utah, Kouri Richins was not a grieving widow at all. She was the one who had made herself one by poisoning her husband with one of the most lethal substances on earth. Eric Richins was 41 years old when he died on March 4, 2022, inside the family's home in Kamas, Utah. He and Kouri had 3 young sons together and had been married for years, though by the end the marriage was troubled, financially strained, and by all accounts heading toward an ugly end. Eric had recently updated his will, cutting Kouri out of large portions of the estate in the months before his death. She had failed real estate ventures that had left her deeply in debt, and she stood to receive a significant payout from Eric's life insurance policy if he died. On the night of March 3, 2022, Kouri Richins brought Eric a Moscow Mule cocktail as what she described as a romantic gesture, an attempt to reconnect after their difficulties. The next morning, Eric Richins was found dead. He was initially believed to have died of a heart attack. His body was released to the family without a toxicology screening. It was Eric's family that pushed for answers. They didn't believe the story. They pressed for an investigation, and when that investigation came, what the toxicology results revealed was staggering. Eric Richins had 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in his system. Fentanyl, a synthetic opioid so potent that a dose the size of a few grains of salt can kill a healthy adult. Someone had put enough of it in his drink to kill 5 people. Investigators began looking deeper. What they found was devastating. Evidence suggested Kouri had tried to kill Eric before. Months earlier, according to prosecutors, she had obtained fentanyl through a drug dealer and had allegedly laced a sandwich she gave him. Eric had become violently ill but survived that incident. He had told people around him that he believed Kouri was trying to poison him. No one had taken it seriously enough. Then investigators found something that stunned even seasoned prosecutors. After Eric's death, while portraying herself publicly as a devastated widow, Kouri Richins had written and self-published a children's book titled Are You With Me? The book was described as a guide to help children cope with the loss of a parent. She promoted it in media interviews. She did press appearances. She spoke about her grief. She built a public identity around her loss, a loss she allegedly manufactured herself. Kouri Richins was arrested in May 2023 and charged with aggravated murder and attempted murder. She pleaded not guilty. Her case navigated years of pretrial motions and appeals that delayed proceedings. But as of the time of this documentary's research, her jury trial was proceeding in February 2026 in Summit County. If convicted of aggravated murder, she faces a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case of Kouri Richins is a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous person in a victim's life is the one they trust the most, the one who brings them a drink at the end of a long day. If this story is why you found Cold Case Time tonight, we are glad you're here. Please like this video and subscribe. We cover the cases that matter, and we need your support to keep doing it. Case 4. Sun Cha Warhola, a mother who took 2 children and years of justice. In September 2010, in a home in Layton, Utah, something unspeakable happened. 8-year-old James Warhola and his 7-year-old sister Jean Warhola were strangled to death by their own mother, Sun Cha Warhola, inside the walls of the home where they should have been safe. The killings were not disputed. Sun Cha Warhola was present. The children were found dead. What followed, however, was not a swift road to justice. Instead, it became one of the most drawn-out, agonizing legal processes in Utah history, a case that took the better part of 15 years from the commission of the crime to a final resolution. The reason for the delay was Sun Cha Warhola's mental competency. Year after year, psychiatric evaluations raised questions about whether she was mentally fit to stand trial. The court process was repeatedly halted. Hearings were scheduled and canceled. The years passed. James and Jean remained in their graves. Their family remained in limbo, unable to fully grieve, unable to see justice done, watching a legal process that seemed to move at an impossible crawl. It was not until 2025, 15 years after the killings, that Sun Cha Warhola finally stood before a court and entered guilty pleas to 2 counts of first-degree murder. When judge sentenced her, the weight of those 15 lost years seemed to hang over every word spoken in that courtroom. She was sentenced to 15 years to life on each count of first-degree murder, with the sentences to be served concurrently. For the family of James and Jean Warhola, no sentence could ever truly repair what was taken from them. 2 young children who should have grown up, who should have had birthdays and graduations and lives of their own, were instead robbed of everything by the woman who was supposed to protect them above all others. Suncha Warhola will die in prison. But for a family that waited 15 years for that reckoning, the word justice can only carry so much weight. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Cold Case Time. Every comment, every like, every subscription tells us that you want these stories told, and that these victims deserve to be remembered. Case 5. Kathryn Restelli, the ex-wife who turned a family into a murder conspiracy. The dissolution of a marriage is painful. It is often ugly. It can involve betrayal, financial ruin, legal battles over children, and years of bitterness. But in the vast majority of cases, in every civilized society, it does not end with one person luring the other into an ambush and having them shot to death. Kathryn Restelli made a different choice. In the summer of 2024, Kathryn Restelli was 37 years old, estranged from her husband Matthew Restelli, and locked in what had become an increasingly hostile separation in American Fork, Utah. Whatever the specific dynamics of their failing marriage, prosecutors would establish that Kathryn Restelli had decided that the only acceptable resolution was Matthew's death, and that she was willing to recruit her own family to help her achieve it. The plan she constructed was both cold-blooded and deeply calculated. She would use the pretense of reconciliation to lure Matthew to her mother Tracey Grist's home. She told Matthew, or led him to believe, that a meeting there could be a turning point, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. Matthew Restelli went. He trusted what he was told. He walked into what was waiting for him. What was waiting was Kathryn's brother, Kevin Ellis, positioned and armed. The plan was for Kevin to shoot Matthew, and then for the family to claim the shooting was an act of self-defense. Matthew Restelli was fatally shot. The staged self-defense story collapsed under the weight of forensic evidence and the details of the family's own communications. Prosecutors quickly established that the killing was not spontaneous, it was orchestrated. And the conspiracy ran across 3 members of the same family. Kathryn Restelli was the architect. Her mother, Tracey Grist, provided the location and actively participated in the planning. Her brother Kevin Ellis pulled the trigger. In July 2025, Kathryn Restelli pleaded guilty in Utah State Court to murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and felony firearm discharge, after prosecutors dismissed some charges as part of the plea arrangement. She now faces a sentence ranging from years to life in state prison, with parole a distant and uncertain possibility given the premeditated, organized nature of the crime. Matthew Restelli went to that house believing he might get his marriage back. He never came home. Case 5 is a reminder that trust can be weaponized by the very people who were once the closest to you. Like and subscribe to Cold Case Time. We'll be right back with 5 more stories you need to hear. Case 6. Reyna Elizabeth Flores-Rosales, 99 wounds and a locked refrigerator. Of all the cases in tonight's documentary, this is perhaps the one that affected investigators and prosecutors most personally. This is the case that made a 28-year veteran prosecutor say he had never seen anything like it in his entire career. This is the case where the sentencing judge, a man who has spent decades hearing the worst of humanity, delivered consecutive prison sentences with tears streaming down his face, and personally wrote a letter to the Board of Pardons and Parole asking that this woman never be released. This is the case of 6-year-old Norland Cruz and his mother, Reyna Elizabeth Flores-Rosales. On February 25, 2019, first responders arrived at a home on Manzano Drive in Sandy, Utah, after Flores-Rosales called 911 to report her young son was unresponsive on the shower floor. When paramedics reached Norland, they found a little boy with a weak pulse who was not breathing. As they worked to stabilize him, the extent of what had been done to that child began to emerge. The paramedics called it in. The doctors at Primary Children's Hospital, where Norland was airlifted after initial treatment, cataloged what they found with a level of clinical precision that could not mask the horror behind every entry. 99 separate injuries, in various stages of healing. A massive, full-thickness burn stretching across his entire buttocks region and lower back. The kind of burn that results from sustained contact with scalding heat. Broken bones. Marks consistent with strangulation around his neck. Severe head trauma that doctors said had no accidental explanation. Old scars layered over newer wounds. Abrasions. Open sores. Bleeding from his nostrils. The injuries were not from a single event. They were from months, prosecutors believed years, of sustained, systematic abuse. This was not a mother who had lost her temper once. This was a pattern. This was a practice. As investigators dug into the evidence, they found text messages Flores-Rosales had sent in the hours before calling 911. She wrote about potty training frustrations. She wrote that she would keep Norlin on the toilet until he pooped. She wrote, "This is exhausting." Evidence showed that while she routinely denied Norlin food to the point that he was in a state of starvation at the time of his death, she had fitted the household refrigerator with a bicycle lock, ensuring that the 6-year-old could not access food on his own. Video evidence captured her screaming at the boy, degrading him, calling him names. 2 days after being admitted to Primary Children's Hospital, Norlin Cruz was declared brain dead. The cause of death, non-accidental blunt force trauma to the head. In February 2023, a Salt Lake County jury convicted Reyna Flores-Rosales of reckless child abuse homicide, a first-degree felony, along with 2 counts of intentional child abuse and 1 count of reckless aggravated child abuse. She was 35 years old. On May 15, 2023, 3rd District Judge Douglas Hogan sentenced her to 5 years to life for the first-degree homicide count, 1 to 15 years each for the 2 intentional abuse counts, and 0 to 5 years for the aggravated abuse count, all to be served consecutively. In the history of his time on the bench, the judge told the courtroom he had never encountered a case like this one. He said he had raised livestock and had never seen an animal treated the way Flores-Rosales treated her son. Through tears, he ordered the maximum consecutive terms. He then personally wrote a letter to the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole requesting that Reyna Flores-Rosales never be released from prison. Norlin Cruz was 6 years old. He wanted nothing more than to be loved. His name now lives on in the Norlin Cruz Child Advocacy Award, given annually by the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office to honor those who fight for the protection of children. He deserved so much more than what this world gave him. Please, if this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to Cold Case Time. These children deserve to be remembered. Help us make sure their stories are never forgotten. Case 7. Lori Vallow Daybell, the Doomsday Mother with 7 life sentences. There are true crime cases, and then there are cases so sprawling, so deeply strange, so saturated with death and delusion, that they almost defy the imagination. The case of Lori Vallow Daybell is in a category of its own. Lori Vallow Daybell, born Lori Cox on June 26, 1973, was a former beauty pageant contestant, a game show participant, a mother of several children, and a woman whose connection to the state of Utah ran deep through her faith, her community, and the man she would eventually marry. By 2019, she had built a life anchored in an extremist, apocalyptic religious ideology that she shared with her then-lover and later husband, Chad Daybell, a Utah-born author of religious fiction who wrote about end times, prophecy, and the spiritual warfare between light and dark forces. Together, they developed a belief system that assigned light ratings and dark ratings to the people around them. Those deemed to be possessed by dark spirits, people they called zombies, were considered dangerous, even expendable. The people Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell labeled as zombies tended to end up dead. The trail of bodies begins in July 2019 in Chandler, Arizona. Charles Vallow, Lori's estranged husband of 13 years, the man who had formerly adopted her son Joshua J.J. Vallow, came to Lori's home to pick up J.J. An altercation occurred. Lori's brother, Alex Cox, shot and killed Charles Vallow. Cox claimed self-defense. Prosecutors would later establish that the killing had been carefully planned, that Lori and her brother had purchased a burner phone and arranged an alibi to conceal Cox's presence in Arizona, and that Lori had labeled Charles a zombie possessed by a dark spirit she called Ned, providing her brother with what she believed was spiritual authority to carry out the killing. Charles had taken out a $1 million life insurance policy. Lori was the beneficiary. 60 days after Charles Vallow was killed, Lori's 16-year-old daughter, Tylee Ryan, was last seen alive during a family trip to Yellowstone National Park. 23 days after that, on September 23, 2019, 7-year-old J.J. Vallow, a cheerful, rambunctious boy who had been born prematurely and had learned to read at a middle school level by age 4, disappeared. In October 2019, Chad Daybell's wife of more than 20 years, Tammy Daybell, died at their Idaho home. Officials initially ruled it natural causes. 2 weeks after Tammy's death, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell were married in Hawaii. JJ and Tylee's grandparents and relatives began raising alarms. When police visited Lori and Chad in Rexburg, Idaho, in November 2019 to check on the children, they were told JJ was in Arizona with a family friend. That was a lie. Police returned with a search warrant the next day, but Lori and Chad were gone. They were found months later, in January 2020, on a beach in Hawaii, while the search for their children was unfolding across 2 states. In June 2020, law enforcement agents with shovels descended on Chad Daybell's rural Idaho property. What they found in the ground confirmed the worst fears of everyone who had been searching. Tylee Ryan's remains, badly mutilated and burned, were discovered in a pet cemetery on the property. J.J. Vallow was found buried nearby, his small body wrapped in plastic and sealed with tape. They had been in that ground since September 2019, while their mother was on a beach in Hawaii. The trials that followed took years and unfolded in 2 states. In Idaho, in May 2023, a jury found Lori Vallow Daybell guilty on all charges: 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing Tylee and JJ, and conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Tammy Daybell. On July 31, 2023, she was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. She was then extradited to Arizona to face additional charges, representing herself in 2 separate trials despite having no legal training, and reportedly smiling through much of the proceedings. She was convicted in April 2025 of conspiring to murder Charles Vallow, and in June 2025 of conspiring to murder Brandon Boudreaux, her niece's ex-husband, who survived a shooting attempt in his car in 2019. On July 25, 2025, an Arizona judge sentenced her to 2 additional consecutive life sentences, bringing her total to 7 life sentences. Standing before the court at that final sentencing, Lori Vallow Daybell did not apologize. She complained about jail conditions. She complained about the legal system. She told the court that God was building an army in prison. Arizona Judge Justin Barzee looked at her and said, "The amount of contemplation, calculation, planning, manipulation that went into these crimes is unparalleled in my career." He told her, "You should never be released from prison." J.J. Vallow's grandmother, Kay Woodcock, read a letter in court written from J.J.'s perspective. "I am Joshua Jackson Vallow," she read. "I am the son of Charles Vallow. I should be 13 years old now, but I am forever 7. Then she screamed directly at Lori Vallow Daybell. "I trusted you." That line will stay with us. It should stay with all of us. Lori Vallow Daybell is now serving 7 consecutive life sentences. Her husband Chad Daybell is on Idaho's death row. If this story has shaken you and you want to stay informed about cases like this, please like, comment, and hit the subscribe button on Cold Case Time. Your support keeps this work going. Case 8. Debra Brown, a mother who shot her daughter and her daughter's friend. The city of Ogden, Utah, in August 1997. Inside a home that should have been a sanctuary, 2 teenage girls were shot and killed by a woman they had every reason to trust. Or at least, one of them did. 15-year-old Erin Brown was Debra Brown's own daughter. 14-year-old Crystal Brady was Erin's close friend. Both girls were inside the Ogden home when Debra Brown took a handgun and shot them both dead. The precise circumstances that drove Debra Brown to that moment, the specific arguments, the particular behaviors that enraged her, the exact chain of events in that household in the hours before the shootings, were laid out in the prosecution's case as a portrait of a mother who had reached some terrible breaking point over her daughter's friendships, her daughter's behavior, and her daughter's choices. Instead of handling those conflicts through conversation, through discipline, through the difficult and patient work of parenting a teenager, Debra Brown resolved them with violence. After the shootings, Debra Brown attempted to deflect suspicion by claiming that intruders had broken into the home and carried out the killings. It was a story that fell apart immediately. Forensic evidence placed the gun in her hand. Witness testimony dismantled the intruder narrative entirely. The physical evidence in the home told a story that was impossible to reconcile with her account. In 1998, Debra Brown was convicted by a Utah jury of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The sentence handed down was the harshest the court could impose: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole on each count. Erin Brown never got to be 16. Crystal Brady never got to go home to her own family. 2 young girls who had done nothing more dangerous than be teenagers together were killed by someone who had no right to make that decision. Debra Brown will die in prison. You're watching Cold Case Time. If this is your first time with us, please like, comment, and hit the subscribe button. We'll be back with 2 more cases that you need to hear. Case 9, Tracey Grist, the mother who opened her home to murder. There is something uniquely chilling about the Restelli Grist family murder conspiracy, and that chilling quality does not belong only to the woman who conceived it. It belongs equally to the woman who made it possible. Tracey Grist was 60 years old in the summer of 2024. She was a mother and a grandmother. She was the parent of Kathryn Restelli, the estranged wife whose hatred of her husband Matthew Restelli had curdled into something lethal. And when her daughter came to her with a plan to lure Matthew into an ambush and have him shot, Tracey Grist did not call the police. She did not walk her daughter back from the edge. She did not protect the man who would die. She opened her front door. The plan, as laid out by prosecutors, was deliberate and coordinated. Matthew Restelli was to be drawn to Tracey Grist's home in American Fork under the belief that a conversation there might help repair his marriage. He walked in trusting that premise. What he found instead was a home where every member of the family present that day knew what was about to happen, where the location had been chosen as the kill site, where Kevin Ellis, Kathryn's brother, was positioned and armed, and where the agreed-upon fiction was that whatever happened would be framed afterward as self-defense. Tracey Grist was not merely a passive presence in that house. According to prosecutors, she had been an active participant in the planning of the ambush. She had agreed to allow her home to be used as the place where Matthew Restelli would be killed. She had been involved in the discussions that led to that day. When Matthew Restelli was fatally shot inside her home, that outcome was not a surprise to Tracey Grist. It was what she had helped engineer. In 2025, Tracey Grist pleaded guilty in Utah State Court to murder and conspiracy to commit murder. She faces a sentence ranging from decades to life in prison. Given that she was already 60 years old at the time of the crime, and given the structure of any significant sentence in relation to her age, the odds of Tracey Grist ever leaving prison alive are vanishingly small. She stood in her own home and helped plan the death of the father of her grandchildren. That is what this case comes down to. Matthew Restelli went to that house, trusting in family. He was betrayed by every member of it who was waiting for him there. If the depth of that betrayal affects you as deeply as it affects us here at Cold Case Time, then please like, comment, and hit the subscribe button. We are almost at the end of tonight's documentary, but the last case is not one you want to miss. Case 10, Wanda Barzee, the woman who helped steal 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart. On the night of June 5, 2002, in the Federal Heights neighborhood of Salt Lake City, Utah, a 14-year-old girl named Elizabeth Smart was asleep in the bedroom she shared with her younger sister, Mary Kathryn. Elizabeth Smart's family was prominent in the community, active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, well-respected, well-connected, and believed by everyone who knew them to be safe. None of that mattered on that night. A man entered through a kitchen screen that had been left open. He moved through the house in the dark. He came to the girl's bedroom. He found Elizabeth and pressed a knife to her, telling her to come quietly or he would hurt her family. Her younger sister, Mary Kathryn, lay in her bed pretending to be asleep, watching, terrified, as her older sister was taken. The man led Elizabeth out of the house and into the night. He took her up into the hills overlooking Salt Lake City, to a camp in the woods that he had prepared for her arrival. His name was Brian David Mitchell, a self-described prophet and religious fanatic who called himself Emmanuel and who had done odd jobs at the Smart family home months earlier. He believed, through the cracked lens of his extremist faith, that Elizabeth Smart had been chosen to become his second wife. He had a detailed, written religious manifesto justifying his beliefs and his intentions. And he had a partner, a woman who had been with him from the beginning, who had walked with him to that neighborhood, who had waited as he entered that house and took that child. Her name was Wanda Barzee. Wanda Barzee was Mitchell's wife. She was a Utah mother. She was in her mid-50s when she helped kidnap Elizabeth Smart. And the role she played in the 9 months of Elizabeth's captivity was not that of a reluctant bystander. According to Elizabeth Smart herself, who testified with devastating clarity in federal court, Wanda Barzee was not simply present during the abuse. She actively participated in it. She encouraged Mitchell. She reinforced the rituals and the delusional religious framework that Mitchell used to control Elizabeth. She helped keep the teenager compliant, hidden, and powerless. As Elizabeth would later tell reporters after Barzee was released from prison, Wanda Barzee would encourage her husband to continue to rape me. During those 9 months, Elizabeth Smart was raped daily. She was kept at the wooded camp behind her home for weeks before being moved to California. She was forced to wear white robes and a veil. She was taken out in public on multiple occasions and went largely unrecognized. Barzee was always there. On March 12, 2003, 9 months after the abduction, 2 members of the public spotted Mitchell and Barzee on a street in Sandy, Utah, having recognized them from an America's Most Wanted broadcast. They called police. Officers approached the couple and the girl. When they asked her name, Elizabeth Smart told them her name was Augustine Marshall. It took patient, careful questioning before she confirmed who she was. She was brought home. Mitchell and Barzee were arrested. What followed was an extraordinarily long legal process, extended primarily by years of competency evaluations. Barzee spent time in the Utah State Hospital while courts determined whether she was mentally fit to stand trial. She was forcibly medicated by court order to restore competency. She fought every step of the way. In November 2009, Wanda Barzee finally pleaded guilty in federal court to 1 count of kidnapping and 1 count of unlawful transportation of a minor. In a separate state court proceeding, she pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit aggravated kidnapping in connection with a plot to also abduct Smart's cousin, a plan that had been thwarted only when the cousin woke up during the attempted break-in. On May 19, 2010, federal Judge Dale Kimball sentenced Barzee to 15 years in federal prison. She received credit for the approximately 7 years she had already spent in custody. The state and federal sentences ran concurrently. After completing her federal sentence, Barzee was transferred to Utah State Prison in April 2016. In what shocked and devastated Elizabeth Smart and the broader public, the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole determined in September 2018 that Barzee had served her full sentence when credit for both federal and state time was properly calculated. On September 19, 2018, after serving 15 years in total custody, Wanda Barzee, then 72 years old, was released from prison. Elizabeth Smart held a press conference at the Utah State Capitol, visibly shaken. She said she had been told only weeks earlier that Barzee would remain in prison until 2024. She said she believed Barzee remained a threat, that she had not complied fully with treatment, that she showed no genuine rehabilitation. She said she was frightened. Those fears were not unfounded. In April 2025, Wanda Barzee, then 79 years old, living in Salt Lake City, registered as a sex offender, was arrested for visiting Liberty Park and Sugar House Park in Salt Lake City. As a registered sex offender, she was prohibited from entering public parks. When questioned by police, she said she had visited the parks because God had commanded her to. She was arrested and booked into the Salt Lake County Jail. She was later released pending formal charges. Wanda Barzee is 79 years old. She has never expressed genuine, credible remorse. She is a registered sex offender living in the city where she helped steal a child from her bedroom. And she is, by any measure, still a figure of danger and darkness. Elizabeth Smart has spent more than 2 decades rebuilding her life. She is married, has 3 children, and lives in Utah, the state where she was taken, the state where she was found, the state she has refused to abandon. She became an activist, a child safety advocate, an outspoken voice for victims of abduction and sexual violence. She turned the worst thing that ever happened to her into a force for protecting others. Brian David Mitchell is serving 2 life sentences in federal prison. He will die there. As for Wanda Barzee, whether in prison or under the shadow of ongoing legal proceedings and sex offender supervision. The woman who helped kidnap a child and spent 9 months facilitating that child's captivity and abuse remains one of Utah's most disturbing and most complicated stories of justice and its limits. 10 women, 10 stories, 10 verdicts that the courts of Utah handed down with the weight of everything that was lost, the children who died, the victims who were broken, the families who were shattered, the trust that was betrayed. What ties these 10 cases together is not geography, and it is not the gender of the defendants. What ties them together is the deepest possible violation of the relationship between a mother and a child, or between a person and the ones who depended on them. In each of these cases, someone had power over a vulnerable life. And in each of these cases, they used that power to destroy rather than to protect. Ruby Franke told millions of people how to be a good parent while torturing her own children behind closed doors. Megan Huntsman carried the weight of 6 secret deaths for 18 years and kept the evidence in her garage. Kouri Richins allegedly poisoned the father of her children and then wrote a book about grief. Warhola took 2 young lives and left a family waiting 15 years for a day in court. Kathryn Restelli turned her own family into a murder weapon. Reyna Flores-Rosales put a bike lock on a refrigerator so her 6-year-old couldn't eat and then left him with 99 wounds on his body. Vallow Daybell buried her children in the ground and went to Hawaii. Debra Brown shot her own daughter and her daughter's friend. Tracey Grist opened her front door to a murder plot. And Wanda Barzee stood beside a monster and helped him steal a child. None of them will ever fully escape the weight of what they did. Some will die in prison. Some already have. All of them will carry these crimes as the defining truth of their existence. And the victims, the children, the spouses, the survivors, they are the ones we choose to remember. They are the reason we tell these stories. They are the reason Cold Case Time exists. Thank you for watching tonight's documentary. These cases are not easy to sit with, but they matter. The truth matters. And making sure that justice is visible, spoken aloud, and documented, that matters too. If tonight's documentary moved you, challenged you, or taught you something you didn't know before, please take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment below telling us which case hit you hardest, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button and join the Cold Case Time community. We post regularly, and we go deep on every story we cover. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop asking questions. This has been Cold Case Time.